One thing I found that's sort of cool is in the room history, you can actually hit Control F11 to remove the side panel. So that's how Screeps actually goes about getting their recordings for their like overview videos, things like that. So cool thing you can use. Um, Off the bat, this video is about power creeps and some things to consider before you activate power in a room. Now, this room right here is one that I lost recently during the Tigga War. That was lost because I couldn't create an effective counter to his power creep squads. His power creep squads had a medic on each unit, and each had the shield ability, allowing them to create a sort of fortified position where they could protect that medic with the shield and have quite a bit of hit points to soak up damage. And there wasn't a way that I could directly counter the power creeps without bringing in squads from other rooms, which was hard to do consistently enough because of how effective Tigga's quad squads are. These quad squads are able to do serious damage to melee units um, with a little bit of range to protect them. And because of that, he was able to easily counter my more simple squads. So I'd have to do some serious improvements in my squad logic, positioning, and sort of defensive capabilities to be able to effectively counter power creeps. So if you're a new player, be sure to take these things into consideration first, because the really effective method that Tigga used to take down this room was disrupt terminal, which prevents you from withdrawing any resources. It doesn't prevent you from sending in resources from other rooms or dealing with the market orders, but not being able to remove resources from the terminal makes it very difficult to mount a defense if your defense is reliant on boosted creeps or high energy use to repair walls. And with those couple of considerations in mind, he was able to eventually starve out this room. This room needed safe modes to be able to supplement the fact that it couldn't effectively deal with these power creeps. And once you activate power in a room, you cannot go back without unclaiming the room. That's the only way to reset the power enabled Boolean on a room object. So because of that, I actually had to let this room decay completely, and we'll see where I go with it from now. But the other two things that his creeps were able to do, which were pretty effective, were disrupt spawn, which prevents all spawning progress for 5 ticks with a pretty high ops cost, and the other was disrupt tower, which reduces the damage ratio and also the heal and repair ratio of defending towers. So combined, all of those different things prevented me from spawning my defenders to repair the walls, spawning my defenders that would deal with his squads, pushing them one space away, making them way less effective with their ranged mass attack. Um, and the tower damage is also pretty important because without that, he can be a lot more efficient with his creeps, not having to do as much boosted tough or having to worry as much about keeping his power creeps alive because there's not a lot of damage output from those towers. So one thing to look at here when you're planning your room defense is do not put walls within 3 spaces of the outer layer. So basically what this means is that your wall repairs can't work efficiently unless they have a path from storage or terminal to your walls to be able to repair. And because of the range mass attack and range attacks range 3, you need to have um, minimum 4 so you can leave one space inside for pathing. I don't have that in this room, so I had to do some alternative method here with the internal ramparts, which create safe positions for the wall repairs to stand. Another thing you should do with your walls is do a mix of both wall spaces and ramparts. Range attack and range mass attack, well, range mass attack specifically, only targets owned structures. So, walls are not an owned structure, they're a neutral structure, and they don't take damage from range mass attack. So having a combination of both makes range mass attack less effective, and makes it a little bit harder to break into rooms. So you don't want to do too much wall though, because pure wall section doesn't have a space for a defender to sit and deal melee damage, which is really important to push those attacking squads space off your walls and make them less effective. So a couple things to consider there with your walls. Other things. With this room, you see Tigga actually launched a nuke, and nukes alone are not that effective. There's simple counters you can use, like repositioning structures. For instance, extensions only cost 3,000 to rebuild. So if you're being nuked in a cluster of extensions, it might make more sense to just rebuild those in a different area that's not affected by the nuke. Other things are, well, a terminal only costs 100,000 to rebuild, while a nuke on the square that it lands does 10 million damage, which is equal to 100,000 energy to repair, plus the cost associated with actually running a wall repair for enough ticks to be able to actually do 10 million wall hit points. So pretty expensive operation. So you see that Tigga's broken through this room, and he's managed to clear out most of the extensions. Without those extensions, I can't spawn full-size creeps, which are the only ones that are going to be effective enough to actually deal with these squads. So at this point, the room is more or less lost, and he's just going to go ahead and keep sending in squads until the room is fully clear. So a few other things to notice here are, or to consider, are some strategies I could have used to supplement my energy. A terminal only costs 100,000 to rebuild, so there is a strategy with a ruin structure where you could destroy your terminal manually by attacking it with one of your own creeps, since you can't destroy a structure with enemy creeps in the room. Then you can use 500 ticks of the ruin store property to actually withdraw all the resources from the terminal without any losses. So if your terminal had 300,000 energy, you could get a net benefit of 200,000 by rebuilding the terminal. Not the most cost effective, but it could be a last resort method. Another one would be the nuker, similar principle here. If you destroy it, ruin, store property, 300,000 energy, and 5,000 godium. So the two of those could be pretty effective at sort of supplementing your room energy, being a additional storage for the most extreme circumstances. Okay, other things in this room. You're gonna need a little bit higher walls. 8 million was enough to do about a creep and a half lifetime, which isn't really enough to deal with power creeps organically. Power creeps do have to return to their home room every 5,000 ticks to renew, or they'll die of old age, and they won't be respawnable for 8 hours. So it does open up some interesting strategies, I guess. If you can keep them from renewing, you can prevent them from actually, um, being a threat for long enough to actually prevent the room from mounting an adequate defense. So if my walls were, say, 50 million, they would actually have a small gap in between power creeps because of the time that it would take him to go back to his room and renew. So using that, I could have stockpiled more energy into storage, spawned a few more creeps, things like that. But even that might not be enough. Other things with this room defense that were really unique are just the sheer number of squads he's able to field. I think at one point he had four creep squads, so 20 offensive creeps plus his power creep plus the medic on the power creep. So 22 creeps in my room, all boosted. So a pretty sizable army that Tigga's fielding here, and that's possible because he's actually using creeps to operate spawn in his home room, allowing him to get a time reduction on new spawns. That combined with some other features. Here you can see Tigga is actually bringing in ops from another room to restock his power creep. So the only way this strategy is effective is if you're able to bring ops from a stockpile to restock that creep. He's going to be able to carry about 2600 max at max level, and he burns through about 10 ops per tick. So every 260 ticks, you got to bring in fresh stock of ops. So just having a little supply chain continuously resupplying will be sufficient to continue with the strategy, disrupting spawns, tower, and terminal. Okay, let's check out some other things here. It looks like he's just slowly eating away at the ramparts on the different structures, and at this point, the room is more or less lost. Um, the nuke was unnecessary, but has some interesting effects here. So the nuke resets safe mode cooldown to 0, allowing you to instantly pop another safe mode. So interesting strategy there would be in a long-term siege, you could actually nuke yourself, allowing you to get your safe mode more quickly. Um, but it does come at a cost. All creeps in the rooms are destroyed, and structures that are destroyed don't have ruins, I believe. I believe they're fully wiped out. So this is a problem when you're raiding NPC cores in SK rooms, or when you're dealing with enemy nukes that actually destroy your terminal or storage or things like that. It would destroy all stored resources. So be careful of that. Make sure that you either have a contingency plan to move that terminal or storage, or actually put down a rampart and upgrade it to enough hits to be able to take the 10 million from a direct strike or 5 million from strike in range 3. So, a couple things on those nukes. Other things here that are unique to this attack is Tigga's worked out the kinks in his attack controller unit. So, because I don't have a rampart or wall surrounding this structure controller, and my walls don't encompass that area and sort of enclose it, he's able to bring in a creep, range 1 attack controller, and prevent me from upgrading for 1,000 ticks. And other things are, if he's able to get that counter to fully downgrade, he can reset the safe mode cooldown to 50,000. And a reset to 50,000 basically makes it impossible to maintain this room, because now I got 50,000 more ticks of continuous attacks that are sort of slowly wiping out any structure standing in that room. And now the controller is downgraded from 8 to 7. When that happened, you lose 3 towers, 4 labs, and the observer unit, which are all pretty important in defense. Other things here are that you're going to lose a little bit of energy. You're going to go from 10.9 million energy controller progress RCL8 to about 9.7 million energy, because you're going to lose 10% with the downgrade. So there are some simple counters though, but the problem is, if he's been able to attack controller, you can't upgrade and get that downgrade timer up again for 1,000 ticks. So with the continuous attack and continuous controller downgrade units, he's able to block my upgrading. But if you're able to get an upgrader unit in there to offset the damages, it's actually pretty easy, because a single work part and a bunch of carry parts with energy from another room, maybe with a few tough parts on the front and some heal on the back, would actually be able to up the controller's downgrade timer by 100 ticks per tick. So for 1 energy, you're able to get 100 more ticks on the downgrade timer. And if you get that up high enough, then you can offset all the losses from attack controller parts. But you have to have the controller in a non-blocked mode. Another thing that the block mode will do is prevent you from safe moding. You also can't safe mode if your room is below 50% of the ticks to downgrade. So RCL 8, I believe, is 160 or 200,000. So you have to have a minimum of 80 to 100,000 ticks, whatever 50% of the actual amount is, to be able to pop a safe mode. So things to consider when you're doing defense: either rampart or wall around the controller, bring it inside your walls, or have a contingency plan to bring in a creep from another room, or spawn a specialized creep to upgrade that controller and prevent it from being downgraded. So few things to consider when you're defending in high level combat. So it looks like he's almost destroyed this entire room. He's got multiple squads in here. It looks like he's starting to use some unboosted squads because it's not really necessary that he does full boost. And there would be an opportunity for me to come in and actually counter. But at this point, I've basically given up on the room. The only way to get that upgrade controller, not upgrade controller, once power's been enabled in a room, you can't um, go back to a non-enabled state without unclaiming. So the only way that I can make this room viable again would be to unclaim it. So this room is a lost class. Additionally, if you're a new player venturing into power for the first time, be sure to only activate power in a limited number of rooms and use higher level power creeps. That way, less rooms are going to be vulnerable to exploits like this and different strategies. And it's not that bad because you can actually use a power creep as a regular logistics creep to move around resources, things like that. They have great time to live, they have no spawn cost, but um, you do have to renew them every 5,000 ticks, so not too difficult. Um, but a few things to consider. Maybe hold off on power creeps or have a strategy in mind to deal with some of this high level combat before you start investing heavily in power creeps and activating power in different rooms. So it looks like you can see that Tigga actually pretty quickly removed all the levels from an RCL 8 controller. He did this by multiple attack controller creeps, all attacking from different positions, and that does quite a bit of tick to live damage. I believe it's 600 per 5 claim parts. So if he has, say, 15 claim parts per creep, he's doing like several thousand downgrade timer plus upgrade block for 1,000 ticks and the natural decay. So all these things combined, he was able to pretty quickly remove all the levels from this room. And while he was downgrading, he's got creep just sort of slowly gnawing out these walls, making it less, well, decreasing the possibility of me reclaiming it and trying to mount a new defense. So with all those things in mind, I actually decided to just let this room decay and get that reset on power enabled. Otherwise, this room is basically useless to me. I don't have an effective counter at this point to deal with such a heavy attack assisted by power creeps, and because of that, basically had no other viable strategy. And uh, you can see how effective that attack controller attack was. You have a level 4 room going down to level 1 in a couple thousand ticks, and it looks like this will be the end of the room. Well, thanks for watching, guys. I hope you learned something about high level combat or power creeps. Word of caution to those who are just starting out with power creeps: plan it out, ask questions in the forum, and make sure you're ready.